Hello, human geographers. We are back at it for our final lecture for our political geography unit number 4. And tonight we are going to be talking about territorial morphology. And I always like to start with a little story about this because I was at a conference a few years ago. It was like one of the first years that I was teaching the course. And I'm sitting there, and the instructor is talking, and she says, "So, how many of you discuss territorial morphology with your students?" And almost everyone in the room raises their hand, and myself and another teacher kind of make eye contact across the room, and we like have panic eyes because we're like, "Oh no, we're letting our kids down. We're not teaching them morphology. I don't even know what morphology is." And and then so she starts talking, and the instructor says, "Yeah, so when you're talking about the shapes of states," and I was like, "Oh, that's what this is? We're talking about shapes?" That's what territorial morphology is. It sounds really scary, um, but I remember sitting in that conference going, "Well, why didn't you just call it shapes? I teach shapes. I just call them shapes. I don't call it morphology." But now I call it morphology. It's shapes. That's all we're talking about. So, there are 5 different types of shape when it comes to states. And each of them is going to have an impact on how those states develop, what those states are able to do. So we're going to take a look at each of these. We're going to provide some examples, and then we're going to have a little bit of a quiz. All right, so here we go. The 5 different types of shapes are compact, prorupt, elongated, fragmented, and perforated. Those are our 5. Let's take a look at them. We start out with compact states. By definition, a compact state, and again, anytime we're talking definitions, underline important parts, but maybe out to the side, you're also going to do your association. How are you going to remember this? Might be an example, might be a single word that you're going to latch onto, and then you build a definition around that. All right. Compact state, a state in which the distance from the center to any boundary does not vary significantly. So the ideal compact state would be a circle with the capital at the very center. All right. Now I ask you, how often do you think that is going to happen in the world? Probably not very often, right? All right. So let's take a look at some ways where we might see it. Examples that you see here on the left-hand side there, you have Poland. And Poland's a pretty compact state, not too far off the circle. Warsaw on the eastern part of the state, but pretty close. And then on the right there, you have Kenya and the capital city of Nairobi. A prorupted state, by definition, is an otherwise compact state with a large projecting extension. And a lot of times students don't struggle with compact, elongated, and fragmented because it kind of makes sense. They've heard those terms before. A lot of times prorupted is one that we're not as familiar with. So one way that I've heard students remember this, and I really kind of like this, is prorupt kind of sounds like erupt. Like think of a volcano eruption, right? You got this volcano and it's shooting out from the volcano. That's basically what a prorupt state is. It's compact, but then it's shooting out. There's one large projecting extension that is erupting from the compact state. It's a proruption. So that's what prorupt means, all right? And there's different reasons why they might have this large projecting extension. It might be access to resources, things like water, all right? Great example of a state that might be a landlocked state, but they have this proruption that reaches out to a body of water. Or it could separate two states that otherwise would share a border. Great example of a buffer state. All right, so pro-erupted states could oftentimes act as a buffer between two states so that they won't share a border. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of examples down at the bottom. On the left-hand side, you have the state of Jordan, which we've mentioned before as a buffer state. And on the right-hand side, you have Afghanistan, and you can see it's a very small corruption that Afghanistan has, but it separated the former Soviet Union from the British colony of India. All right, and so you had that extension that was separating them. Great example. Our next one is an elongated state. Definition: a state with a long, narrow shape. It's elongated, it's stretched. And for elongated states, one of the things that has to be a major concern is poor communication, right? Especially when you're talking about a state, like for example, we take a look down at the bottom, is Chile. And Chile, their capital city, Santiago, is near the center of the country, right? It's very elongated, but it is the capital city is very much near the center. And I actually had some friends who traveled to Chile, and they actually said the transportation system in Chile is remarkable. They have overnight buses and things like that that allow people to get from one part of the country to another very, very quickly. It's actually very, very efficient. And so that is something that would be a concern, perhaps more of a concern, in an elongated state like Chile. And on the right-hand side, you have Malawi, which is in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Another elongated state. A fragmented state, as the name kind of suggests, you have fragments, so you have pieces. So a fragmented state is a state whose territory contains isolated parts, separated and discontinuous. So they're non-contiguous. They're not touching, right? And it could be separated by water. Both the examples that you see down at the bottom are separated by water. Japan on the left, Indonesia on the right, but could also be separated by another state as well. With some of the examples that we'll see later tonight, you'll see some of those. And finally, we have perforated states. A perforated state is a state that completely surrounds another one. All right. So this a lot of times gets confusing for students. So I'm going to use the example down at the bottom. All right. Generally, the states that are surrounded are landlocked. Not all the time, though. All right, because there are some exceptions. All right. So let's take a look down at the bottom. And what you see there is South Africa. South Africa is a perforated state. And a lot of times students struggle with, okay, which one's perforated? Is the one that is surrounding or the one that is surrounded? So let's take a look. South Africa completely surrounds another state, and that is Lesotho. But if you're trying to decide, is Lesotho perforated or is South Africa perforated? Take a look at the shapes. What shape would you say Lesotho is? Because it's not perforated, it's actually compact. So if you have that struggle and you're trying to remember, hey, go through and narrow it down. Pinpoint which is which and different types of shapes and go about it that way. All right. Eliminate wrong options and narrow it down that way. All right. So in this case, you have South Africa as a perforated state because it completely surrounds another one. Okay. So now, let's go ahead and we're going to do a little bit of a quiz. All right. I want you to put your guesses down. If you get them wrong, you get them wrong. It's not that big of a deal. We're going to address this in class. But I'm interested. Are you going to have... how are you going to do on this? Okay, take a shot. You get it wrong, we'll fix it later. Okay? So here we go. We start out with Gambia. What shape would you say Gambia is? Our next state, we have Senegal. All right, and you can see the Gambia in between Senegal. So what do you say? What shape would Senegal be? Uruguay. What would we say Uruguay would be? Our next one, and I'm going to use this as a little bit of a why this is tricky, okay? Because sometimes there's multiple answers. Italy is a great example of that. Italy, three answers, three compelling cases that could be made for this. So what do you think? We only gave you 5 shapes. So which 3 do you think would work for Italy? Well, come up with your guesses. Which shapes do you think would fit for Italy? Our next one, Russia. This one's kind of tricky. Gotta pay attention to the details here. Pay attention to the details. Follow Dora. The Democratic Republic of the Congo. What would we say about the Democratic Republic of the Congo? What is our shape there? Angola, another tricky one. What are we going to say about Angola? Kind of tricky. And the previous one, Democratic Republic of the Congo and Angola, are connected by their shapes and the answers here. So kind of tricky. Pay attention to the details. Namibia, also in sub-Saharan Africa. Namibia, what do we say? And then with some of these, maybe try and guess why. Why are they that shape? Why do you think Namibia is this particular shape? Why do you think the Democratic Republic of the Congo was the shape that it was? How did then affect Angola? There's how all these are connected. So what do we got here? Namibia, what do you got? What do you got? Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe. This one's kind of tricky. I've gone back and forth in previous years and debated this one. Kind of tricky. I don't know that it's one that the AP exam would tackle. They're probably going to go with ones that are much more clear cut and only just a single answer. This one I've gone back and forth on. Vietnam, Southeast Asia. What would you say the shape of Vietnam is? And getting towards the end now, Tanzania, also a tricky one. Tanzania, another great example of we've mentioned it before, a state with a forward thrust capital. The capital city has actually been moved from Dar es Salaam to the interior where Dodoma is. So just a side note, because now we're actually taking a look at it a little bit closer. All right. So what would you say about Tanzania? Another tricky one. Kind of tricky. What do you think? Tanzania, what's our shape? And we leave off here with a little bit of an answer key. Several of the ones that are on here also come onto this answer key. So you can kind of start to check how you did with this. But we're going to take a look at this in class tomorrow. How'd you do? Why are things the way that they are? Can you explain them? Keep that in mind. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. I'll see you in class tomorrow. Good night.